So briefly, welcome to the Teaching for Civic Empowerment. You just skipped our introductions, but we're going to go forward for those of you who are on the recording, but for everybody else, welcome. And we're going to go on to our next slide. So we're going to launch a poll right now, and we just want you to introduce yourselves. The poll is basically going to be your grade level and position and where you're from. So there's 2 questions. So if you can go ahead and start entering those, we'd really appreciate it. It'll help us figure out who's here. You have about 20 seconds left. Okay. Looks like that's mostly a pause. We got most of you. Sorry if you didn't get a chance, but it looks like we're sharing the results. All right. The greatest number of folks are from high school, except government civics, but we also have a lot of middle school folks, and it kind of ranges on the other steps. And then the greatest number of folks are joining us from Southern California, but we have a number of folks from the Bay Area, Northern California above the Bay Area, Central Valley, and out of state. So welcome to everyone. That kind of gives us a sense of this. These collaboratives are co-sponsored by our whole statewide network, the California History Social Science Project. So these notices go out statewide. And did you all see the results? Nod your head if you saw results. Okay, great. So thank you all for participating in that. Holly, if we can go on. As we get started, we want to also recognize the land acknowledgements that we honor here, and we as a network, we acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the indigenous people where we live and work, and their historic and continuing relationship to these lands. And myself, Stacy, I live in Nisenan lands here in Sacramento, and UC Davis is located, and where I work when we're not zooming in is on Patwin lands.
And UC Berkeley and where I live is on the Chochenyo Ohlone lands.
And I'm on the Tenyan Ohlone lands.
Okay, thank you. As we move on to the next set, what we have, Devin has just put into the chat a link. For any of you who have not used this link before, it's a place where you can go. It's not exact, but it's an ongoing kind of map. You can look up by your address, or at least get close to looking at whose lands you are on, whether you're living there, working there, or traveling. We like to be aware of that, and we invite you, should you feel comfortable in the chat, to look that up for a minute while I go on and acknowledge the lands where you are. And so that's an option if you feel comfortable. Sorry, if we can go back to that for one more second. So if you feel comfortable, please acknowledge the lands, and if you want to pass, that's okay, but at least you have a resource where you can look that up going forward. You can do that on your phone or in the map. So thank you for participating, for those of you who feel comfortable doing that. And I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge the other pieces. Excuse me, I'm changing my slide deck because it's all of a sudden I lost it. I also want to just acknowledge that we are living and teaching in a time of disruption, from the police, the state-sanctioned violence against Black Americans in the States, to the time that we're living in with COVID, that it's affecting us, our health, our families, and particular communities of color, and how we have to live and work at this time, and all the other challenges facing us, that this is a time of disruption. And we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that in March, when you left your classrooms, I think everybody was hoping that that emergency style of distance learning would just be for the spring, and we'd be heading back to a better planned, better prepared time to be teaching in a few weeks. And for some of us, that's what's happening, and for others of us, it's still it's a little bit still concerning. And so we want to acknowledge that. And when we're thinking about civic empowerment, how we do civic empowerment from a distance may look different than how we would do civic empowerment teaching for that in the classroom. So I just want us to take a few cleansing breaths to acknowledge that, sit with it, before we move on to really getting into the main portion of our program. So thank you for that. Thank you for giving us the space to do that. And if anybody feels like sharing something that's come across because you just want to get it out, please do in the chat. But otherwise, we're ready to move into the main part of our program. Thank you. So our agenda today is to, we've done our acknowledgements. We're going to switch it over to Devin in a minute to talk about the characteristics of a civically empowered person. We're going to share in a breakout, share our current work, challenges, goals. Holly's going to share a strategy that she developed in partnership with the UC Berkeley project on root causes of problems. So what, why, so what, and why, and the lesson share. Then we're going to have another discussion. And finally, we have wrap up announcements and resources. And then we'll have a feedback form and a follow-up email. So thank you for everybody for that. And let's move on to the next slide. Finally, our norms. We just want us, I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we hope that you will agree with us that we want to speak with intention. We want to listen actively, try to say just enough and be conscious about our space when we are talking and when we are not talking. We want to honor privacy and stories, especially if somebody shares something that's very personal, that's their story, and we are grateful for them sharing, but we want to respect their confidentiality. And finally, if you have questions, please type your questions into the chat. Our facilitators will be monitoring the chat and either respond in the chat or bring it to the attention of the presenter. If your question went unheard in the chat for a period of time, feel free to use the hand raise section on the participants. So you click on participants, you can then raise your hand, or you should be able to do that. Are there any other, before we move on, are there any other collaborative norms that anybody feels comfortable or wants to share that you feel like we haven't covered here? Okay, if you do, feel free to add to the chat, but I think it's time for us to move on. Okay, so Devin, turning it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. So we want to start this, this series of collaborations with a little bit of discussion about what it is that we're looking for. What are we trying to do as teachers when we're thinking about engaging our students in civic engagement, in civic action, and also empowering them as participants in their society, in this society. And because as we know, as Stacey was mentioning, this is a time of incredible motion among youth. In general, it's been happening over the number of years, but certainly over the throughout the summer with George Floyd, and it's really amplified. And so the question comes for us as teachers, we're in this, history teachers, in this unique position to be able to contribute to that sense of empowerment and that ability for them to actually engage with efficiency and efficacy. So one of the things we want to do is think about, especially from our perspective in the classroom, what are the characteristics of a civically engaged person? And we're going to do it through a word cloud where you're going to enter a single word and you can enter multiple words. And while we're entering words, we're going to put on the screen the cloud as it forms. And so if there's a word that you see that you want to emphasize, you can go ahead and type that in again. And you know how the word clouds work. The words that get most entries get larger and such. So it's a chance to kind of really express those ideas about what does it mean to have a civically engaged student or a person. So let's go ahead and do that. The link is in the chat. And in a second, Holly will put up the results as they form. And let's just spend a minute thinking about what this idea. So Holly, it's not the live screen you're showing there. Can you, you can click on the link that's in our notes. So Holly, do you want to share the results on the screen? Do you see that link there in our notes in the middle column? There we go. A couple of words are standing out. We're seeing engaged, aware, thoughtful, active, informed, passionate, connected, reflective. That's important, yeah. And we'll share this link so you can hang on to this word cloud as you like. The link to the results. Okay, let's just add another word or two. Let's wrap this part up so we can move on. And you know, I think as you look at those characteristics that people have put in here, part of what we want to do today and throughout these periods of collaboration is think, what is our role as history social studies teachers in promoting and enabling and scaffolding and supporting students to be able to really grow into those characteristics, because it's there's a difference between the desire to act and to make change and the ability to do so with efficiency and efficacy. So I think this is a good set of characteristics to start with, and let's move on and think about what that looks like in our sessions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into a breakout room right now, and with that, reflecting on those ideas about what our goals are for engaged and actively empowered student. Let's think about how we're going to, what we do in our classroom. And we want to start with breakout groups of 4 or 5 people and think about what the work we're currently doing is, what is the work that we need to be supporting and working toward, what are our challenges, what are our goals. And so if you go to that link, and Stacy's putting the link in the chat, and what you'll do is you go to there, and what I want, once we have created, don't everybody open this because Google limits the number of people you can go to, but once we've created the breakout rooms, what we want you to do is look at the top of the header, and you'll see a whole list of breakout rooms. We won't have that many because we didn't know how many people to expect. But click on the breakout room you're assigned to, 1 person from each group. And that person can take notes, please. And then what we'll do as you're closing down the breakout rooms is think about somebody who can share, and we'll probably be sharing highlights into the chat. But it's a chance to think about this among yourself. And what we really recommend is so that everybody has time to talk. We only have about 10 minutes in this breakout room. So be sure to budget your time and maybe start just alphabetically as a way to get yourself moving. Are there any questions before we go off into the breakout room? You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one. We understand our goals, okay? What we're doing, what our challenges are, what our goals are. So let's go ahead and start the breakout rooms. And if you need to bounce out of the breakout room to ask a question, Stacy and I will be in the main room or one of us will be in the main room to help you with that. Okay? Okay, let's go for it.
Devin, I blanked. Was I doing the breakout rooms? Because I totally
Yeah,
blanked.
start the breakout room if you could.
I totally blanked. Devin, can you switch me back to being host? I didn't do it. I switched to you
Okay,
because
hold on a
I
second.
got mixed up. Sorry, everybody. That was totally my bad.
Okay.
Okay, got it. I will do those really quickly. Assign 15 people, so 5 per room.
It's about 11 or 12 rooms, 12 rooms.
Yep. Okay, that should work.
All right, there we go. So everyone should go ahead and join a room that you're being asked to join.
Audrey, are you having trouble finding your room? She may have stepped away from the computer at this moment.
Yeah, Casey too.
Oh, that's Catherine. That's Catherine Cortez. She works for me.
Okay. So for the next breakout room, there's an option in the breakout rooms to assign automatically.
Uh-huh.
And then I'm not to assign automatically, but to move them automatically. So they don't need to click anything, they just get sent.
Oh, okay.
It's an option in the Zoom when you create the breakout rooms.
Okay. Sorry, I totally blanked out that I was doing the first one. I don't know. Even though the notes say to switch to you after we do this. Luckily, it was random. That didn't help. Cindy, do you need assistance? Yeah, I registered Catherine at the last minute so she could get a thing. And I just, when I do it really quickly and I don't type her full name or anything in.
That's fine. She's got a baby on her.
Yeah.
Hi, Catherine.
All right.
So we can be looking at the Google Docs to kind of get. So welcome back, everyone. I think everyone is back. Yes. Can you see if the rooms are all closed? Yeah.
One room is not quite out yet, so we have about 30 seconds.
Okay, so we're going to be asking people just to briefly share highlights from the conversations. Obviously not reporting on the entire conversation, but just key takeaways from that. And hopefully there's somebody from each group who is willing to do that. And we're going to spend just a few minutes listening to some people's highlights. So maybe we should go ahead. Yes.
Devin, hold on a second. I'm sorry, I was wrong. There was more rooms that weren't there. If you can just wait.
Sure.
Now everybody's back, so maybe you can repeat that. I apologize.
All right, well, welcome back, everyone. We're going to spend just a few minutes hearing highlights from different people. And why don't we go ahead and just verbally do that? And we'd like you to be very succinct, maybe a minute per group or less, just key points. So let's start with the first group. Is there somebody who is prepared to just give us some highlights from that first group? Unmute yourself and.
We didn't really decide on anybody, so I'm just going to jump in.
Beautiful.
But one of the main topics was that in trying to plan for distance learning, we're adapting what we see as the core content history standards, and and at the same time, we're having to re-examine them. What's the purpose of them? How do they relate to the citizenry? How do they relate to the 3 types of citizens was one of the topics that was brought up based off of the handout that was passed out yesterday. And when we're looking at it through different lenses so that we can adapt and better understand the kinds of lenses that have been used. And then when the testing piece is more formal and we understand what is going to be expected of us as educators, the hope is that the standards we'll be teaching are really standards that cut across the educational frameworks to allow students to develop those deep thinking and deep engagement strategies that allow them to analyze and be good citizens, rather than just memorizing things that they can look up on Google.
Great. Second group.
I can go. We also didn't pick. Forgot about that part. But we just there was a wide array of grade levels. And so we were talking about the different kind of projects that we did, and we're all kind of at different levels in the kind of work that we are able to do. But we also talked a lot about the challenges, and something that came up a few times was how can we do these things in an online space, and like what are kind of the challenges of getting students to be empathetic and to care and to be connected and to connect with these organizations through distance learning. And we also talked a lot about the goals that we had, and a lot of the goals again kind of center around connecting with local infrastructure, local community organizations, finding ways to collaborate with other schools from the starting point, bridging the gap between activism and community work, and getting students invested. So those were kind of our goals and the things that we talked about.
That's great. And just to remind people that we will be sharing the notes so you can look at some of the comments that people have made in more detail. So this is a great summary. So how about the third group? I'm going to share.
All right, I'm going to share out from group 3. We all had very similar things that we were working on, and therefore our challenges and goals were very similar. Mainly, it all came down to making learning more meaningful and using inspiration from things that are happening nationwide right now to inspire our work. So whether that's with discussions about federalism or Confederate statues or native lands, using what's happening now. The biggest challenges that we talked about were finding resources and like curating the best resources to support our work. And then also we talked about building trust and rapport via distance learning. So with the start of the school year on Zoom, we thought that was a big challenge of like, how do we build the rapport and then the trust between teacher and students, amongst students, and then also for students to trust themselves. That's work that we haven't done online before. And our main goals were just implementation, like figuring out a way to make it work and to get it done.
Thank you. And that was group 3, right? So group 4?
Hi, I'm Tanya, and in group 4, we had some really good conversations. It sounded like some of us had done some similar things, and our challenges all kind of seemed in the same vein of our goals as well. So, for example, we seem to largely be doing things like having students study current issue of interest to them and then reaching out to an elected official to inform that person and maybe take a position on it, or taking a thematic approach to teaching history, and at the end of each quarter, then having a civic action project associated with that theme. So for example, if you have a theme on environment and human impact, then doing something that reflects that as the concluding project. I teach in the St. Louis area, and my school has started a history of St. Louis course as a way to I think we'll be doing more and more with civic engagement in that one as well. Also service learning was something else we talked about. But our challenges have a range. Like one of our members is in an environment where he teaches students in grades 8 through 12 in the same classroom. So figuring out how to balance those different ages and needs appropriately to do civic engagement. Or also thinking about how do you shift students from taking what I would call limited actions, such as learning something and writing a letter and reaching out to an official, to doing something more meaningful as well. Like how do you take your information into something like the school might find useful? Or how do you balance making students informed or aware of issues and depressing them because it's really heavy stuff? So how do we do that age appropriately? Our goals included how do we integrate this civic engagement into the full year, so it's more than just a project. Centering youth into the narrative of social change, especially looking at the ways that other youth have been involved in civic engagement, and giving students time and space to reflect rather than rushing into the next piece of content.
Great. And how about the fifth group?
I'm Leticia, and so some challenges that were discussed was how to continue. One of our educators does a voter registration drive with her students. So one challenge that she presented is how to continue voter registration in a digital world without ever meeting students in person. Another challenge was discussed about like how county laws the county is creating laws that are conflicting with the state laws. Another challenge is unaware of how teaching will look this fall. And then our final challenge that was discussed was how to engage in short period time slots when you have like so much information to share with students. And then some goals, 4 goals were mentioned. 1, help students explore the past to guide future decisions as to not repeat mistakes. 2, empower student voices and encourage them to be active participants. 3, balance between screen time, overwhelming their students, and keeping them engaged. And then finally, how to include hidden and missing voices in main narratives.
Great. Okay, group 6, and we're kind of going through these quickly again, and just a reminder, the notes are available. So group 6. Is there someone from group 6 who could give us a quick summary?
I'll jump in. I was muted, so
Thanks, Brett.
I couldn't say it just yet. The big theme that I heard from a number of folks, and we came from different backgrounds, both in and out of the classroom now, but a big one is the challenge of kind of fitting in civic-minded lessons, particularly when there's a big push for raising test scores. The other big piece there is kind of helping students feel empowered, you know, kind of bringing these up and in such a way that it kind of pulls kids in. There were projects happening in other districts as well, like a civic action project that was brought up earlier. At my site, we've created a civic empowerment project that blends the Constitutional Rights Foundation Civic Action Project with Project Citizen, which is another, and now that's their senior project. The biggest challenge that's largely been brought up already. Oh, let me bring up this last point too. We also discussed ways to kind of foster a sense of civic mindedness, not necessarily just in terms of voting or even like always engaging with elected officials, but just the idea of critical inquiry and looking at different perspectives and allowing kids to understand that those differing perspectives matter and that they have a range of choices regarding a set of issues, be it the Dakota pipeline issue to you know, some of the protests that are occurring right now. There are different viewpoints on those, and I think that's quite important. But the challenge that have already been brought up largely, and I'm glad that it is coming up, is how do you kind of carry out these kinds of projects and build that sense of empower differing voices over distance learning?
Yeah, a lot of people are mentioning that as a huge challenge. So we only have a couple minutes left for the share out, so I'd like to ask the groups 7 through 12 if there's some things that are really important highlights that you want to add that have not been said. Does someone want to, from one of those groups, just want to kind of open up and offer some thoughts, new thoughts that haven't been mentioned?
Hey, Devin, it's Pam Williamson. Sorry,
Hi,
we're
Pam.
in room 12. One of the biggest piece that we were talking about is the idea of civic discourse among students. Is the idea, because I know I'm walking into a group of students who are so narrow-minded in what they believe and where they're thinking, they will not hear the other side. So we had talked about that. So that's one of our goals, and it's yet a challenge for us. So that was something that we kind of all threw out there that we wanted to do. And of course, you know, the online aspect, but civic engagement and an era of apathy among students, because it's, you know, just about me.
Is there someone else from another group that wants to add?
I'm in
new
group
ideas?
7. I just wanted to make a pitch for the state seal of civic engagement. We talked about that, and that's in the chat box, was a link to just getting some information about that, and it's also in our notes for group 7.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in? Okay, so I really appreciate the people who shared out and the work you did in your breakout rooms. And again, the notes are there, and we'll be continuing these conversations hopefully a little later today, but also hopefully as a cohort and as groups as we continue on. And I think that people are raising a lot of really, really important ideas that different ones of us may have ways of thinking about that we want to share, and that's part of this collaborative, is that a challenge in one place may be something that other people have really been able to take on and address. And so we want this collaborative to be a place where that kind of cross-fertilization can take place. I know that we've been doing a lot of work with the groups I've been working with in Santa Clara and in San Mateo. And we want to segue into one of the strategies that we've been doing in the Santa Clara and San Mateo groups under the Integrated Action Civics. And actually, this is not unique to us. MICVA Challenge does it. And if you go on the internet, you can see lots of examples of this idea of root cause analysis. And the idea of root cause analysis is really trying to understand, well, you know, it's one thing to have a problem and see it, but we as history teachers have the ability to really help students uncover the causes and consequences of things on a deeper level using historical tools that we have, analytical tools that we have. And I want to turn it over to Holly, who is a teacher leader who's worked with us in Santa Clara for a number of years, and kind of share some of the ideas that we have around this and ways that she's brought it into her classroom. So Holly, do you want to take over? And just let me know when you want me to put the actual link to the assignment into the chat.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everybody. I just want to echo a lot of the thoughts and concerns that you have about moving a lot of this stuff online to distance learning. So the thing I'm going to share with you was done prior to distance learning, but we're all in the same boat trying to figure out how to do this. I'm going to call it novel teaching in a novel coronavirus time. So really kind of playing around with that. So there were some pieces in the notes, I think, about, you know, how do we fit this into curriculum and testing, and how do we do this stuff? And what we've done with our curriculum is really sort of taking the civic action pieces or civic empowerment pieces and rolling that into our curriculum to streamline students' ability to identify the action steps that they want to take in any situation. And we're sort of approaching our history classes as a civic empowerment lab, where they can actually look and see how different groups and movements and time periods have played out over time, using various civic action processes and steps as a way to analyze the past. So when I think about what's going on and what my students are facing, I teach in a predominantly low-income, predominantly Latinx high school. They're asking me these questions. They're asking me, like, why is this happening? I thought that I don't understand why this is going on. What's causing this? How did we get here? Like, those are the questions on kids' minds. So this root cause analysis has been a really powerful way for them to start being able to answer those questions for themselves. Because that's really what we want to get them to do. They're not always going to have one of us to ask. So how do they figure out how to do that on their own? So we we rely on working with Devin and working with our program. We use a lot of Peter Seixas's ideas, the idea of cause and consequence as a historical thinking skill. This idea that history and actions are driven by multiple causes and have multiple consequences, and that causes can vary in their influence. And we want students to be able to start playing around with that complex web of cause and consequence. These are two guideposts of a much larger set. So we can add a link to Seixas's Big Six guideposts in our resources. But this, I think, is really what's being addressed when you do this root cause analysis. So Devin, if you want to go ahead and add the link into the chat so people can look at the instructions. So this activity or this lesson, I'm actually going to call it more of like a strategy or a structure. Helps kids answer the question why and so what, and they can just start to follow the lines of inquiry down the line to start figuring out what are the symptoms of a problem, what are the roots of a problem. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the official handout if you click the link in the chat. And then I'm just going to show you kind of our adaptations for how we used it in a 10th grade class and then school-wide. So are there any questions so far about any of this stuff? You can just kind of unmute yourself or ask in the chat.
If I can ask a quick question, one of the things that got brought up in our group that I failed to mention was kind of addressing the potential politicization of what it is that we're teaching. In other words, some resistance to some of what's happening in our classrooms. And I'm wondering how you've thought about that in addressing some of these types of approaches.
Yeah, you know, I'm gonna hold off on answering that for just a moment and come back to it when you kind of see what we did. We like kind of our mode is kind of, if you've ever listened to the podcast Throughline on NPR, that's kind of our way of thinking about our history courses. So we take a current issue and then we design the unit around that current issue and we pull the standards in that way. So a lot of you talked about doing thematic teaching. We're doing the same thing. We're just sort of pulling from whatever's in the news. So the first application that we did, I taught 10th grade, and we decided to teach a unit on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was prompted by the decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. So we decided that was up in the news, people were talking about it, and we decided that we wanted to pull that in. So there's a lot of text on here, but I just wanted you to know a little bit about where we were and what we had done by the time we got to root causes. So we did a lot of work around the idea of mapping and bias, geography and bias, language and bias, looking at language in the narrative, how the words that we choose to describe an issue contain bias. We had them do a timeline analysis of major events, looking for biased language and trying to figure out which perspective was being amplified in a given timeline. And then students had actually already done one of these trees in a previous unit where they've had a lot more structure and guidance. So kind of coming back to that politicizing question, we are, and I say we, because I have a pretty collaborative team. So we and I especially are under we kind of operate in the way that it's our job to teach students how to identify bias, that we really can't be totally objective. And so rather than pretending to be objective, we're going to teach you how to find the bias in whatever's being discussed. So the objectives of this lesson were to take all the information they had from various narratives, mapping, and a timeline, and then really try to figure out what are the root causes by perspective. So they had to articulate it from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. That was kind of our goal. So these slides might be a little fuzzy, kind of like my picture. I'm going for that like 80s fuzzy Sears vibe right now. But we had them take the tree that you're looking at, we had them divide it into two. So they had Israel on one side, Palestine on the other. And we had them go from what they consider the greatest symptoms of the problem. So that could be violence, they were able to identify that. And then they kept asking themselves, why is this here? Why is this here? Why is this here? What is this coming from? Until they could get all the way down to the roots. So violence occurs, why? Well, there are bombings being done. Israel is shooting missiles at Palestine. Well, why? Well, because Palestine is doing X. Well, why? So we just kind of kept going down the line. And then we had them use their tree to start trying to write out a narrative for why these two things happened. Our goal being that if they can identify the root causes, then that will help them identify the action steps that could be taken to not just address the symptoms of a problem, which is oftentimes where we get stuck, but to actually address the root causes. So I just put in a student work sample of what one student's initial thoughts were. This is kind of her outline. So she ended up thinking that really the root causes were a human rights issue and land rights, and then foreign interventions and land rights. And then she put in screenshots of the evidence. You can see where she had circled terms or key terms that helped her identify these pieces. You know, and she sort of landed on she would want to address land rights because that's sort of a commonality on both sides. So that's one way that we did it. So we're definitely teaching content, but we're using the civic engagement pieces as a way of analyzing the content that we already are teaching anyway. So it's just kind of a restructuring or a reframing. So that was a lot. Any questions? Or I don't know, Brett, if I got to your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay. All right, so then the other thing that we did is, as a department, we decided to do a department-wide civic engagement. We were calling it an extravaganza. We unfortunately got cut short by COVID, so that was a bummer. But we had students in cross-age groups working together to identify an issue that was important to them. So we had 9th graders through 12th graders. They decided what they wanted to work on. They created the teams. They got themselves into teams. And then they had to do some individual brainstorming and research where they individually did a root cause just from their own perspective. And then they came together with their cross-age team and they developed. So again, these are two samples of student trees, and these are from student identified projects. So we had one group of students working on financial literacy, for example, and trying to figure out what are the root causes of a lack of financial systems. And then another group working on school culture and climate. We had groups working on police brutality. So we took what we were doing in class and then sort of tried to make it even bigger and do something school-wide. So now I'd like to, I just wanted to open it up for, if I have time, open it up for some just discussion or questions or even some brainstorming. I'm just as curious how you guys would move this online. So, yeah.
I have a question about your school culture climate, because I can't read any of what that says.
Oh, yeah, when you get the slides, you can expand it probably, but do you want to know what she wrote on there?
Yeah, exactly what were they examining there?
They wanted to look at mental health resources and support for students. So that's listed on their trunk. That's how they identified their problem. And they have some pieces in the symptoms that are like bullying, isolation, lower attendance. Those are pieces that they identified as being symptomatic. And then down here in the root causes, they have issues of low funding, previous resources that didn't work out, underlying family issues, lack of resources. So this is what they were kind of, and this is all student generated. We didn't provide them with any guidance. So this is all their ideas and what they researched and coming from what they.
And so can you just say, like, from the tree then, how does that translate into action?
So what they did following this was they picked 2 root causes and 2 symptoms that they wanted to work with. And then they did another strategy called clarifying goals. And we're in the process of identifying the stakeholders they wanted to work with when school was closed. So we haven't quite figured out how to do this online yet, but really, selfishly, any ideas you have would be pretty magical. I'm just putting that out there. Also, it's really fun.
Holly, I have a question for you. When you were saying that they were at the clarifying goals part and then identifying is there some sort of a pattern that you lead them through to get to an end result so that we have maybe those steps that we're looking at where you could say, oh, we got stuck here, but we can work on that, but here is what we would naturally see as our next step?
Yes, like I said, we haven't worked all the way through, and a lot of this work is coming out of the work that I do with Devin on our Integrated Action Civics group. But we generally start with having them identify a problem, doing some research, root causes, clarifying goals, identifying stakeholders. Once you have the stakeholders, then you can start to work with specific strategies to address that or to work with specific stakeholders. And then the action piece is implementing those strategies.
And do you have those documents, like resources available with yours?
Can I jump in here, Holly?
Yeah, please do.
So toward the end of this, I am going to tell you about a workshop series of three mornings that we're going to do in early August that will outline and kind of give an introduction to exactly the process that Holly's talking about, that we've been modeling and researching in Santa Clara and San Mateo. So I'll put that in a little bit later. I see Stacy just put the link in there. But I'll mention it in a little bit, and you'll be more than invited. Welcome to join us in those sessions as well. We didn't really have time today to do the whole thing.
Right. And I really want to reiterate that we use our history curriculum as the lab. So they're not learning how to do this root cause tree for a project. They're learning how to do the root causes tree to analyze their past, to look at the events in the past. We have them do a power analysis to identify who has power in a given situation we're studying in the past. So for us, we really try to work this stuff in as a lens through which to analyze history. Why did things happen in the way that they happened? Who were the historical actors? What would have happened if there was a different historical actor? You know, so having them really work with these tools as a lens through which they can understand history, and then, you know, by the same token, use that knowledge of what has happened prior to inform what they think should happen now. So it's pretty cyclical for us all the time. And I think there's a raised hand, Melissa.
Thank you. So my question is related to the challenges that some of us are facing in determining what the core standards are for history in our grade levels. And I think that what you're talking about seems to cut across grade levels. And what I'm hearing is analysis, the ability to actually read documents or historical documents, and to synthesize information. Can you elaborate? Am I getting my points right?
Yeah, so my approach has changed. I definitely used to be more of a, I'm going to start at point A and get to the end, quote unquote. And then the end kept being like 1970, and it kept getting to 1970, and then like 2000 happened, and then the 2010s, and now we're in 2020, and I had kind of a existential crisis, and I decided that, you know what, I'm not going to start at the beginning and try to get to the end, because I never get to the end. So I'm going to start with the current and then apply the standards back. So I would say with the new framework, we have a lot of flexibility. The framework acknowledges that we cannot teach everything. And we know we can't teach everything because everyone always stops US history at Vietnam or Watergate, right? And then maybe you get a day on the 1980s and you're like, okay. So we know we don't teach everything. So what I did was I just surrendered to that a little bit and said, it's okay. I'm not going to be able to teach anything. So the things that I do choose, where I spend my curricular real estate, is going to be very, very thoughtful. And I'm really going to think about the pieces that they need moving forward. So yeah, I have a very, very skills-based course, a lot of reading, a lot of writing. I have a lot of English language learners. I work with ELD 2s in my on-level 10th grade classes. So a lot of reading, writing, language support, and then analytical structure. So to me, this root causes is one analytical structure for understanding. You could do the causes of the Great Depression, the causes of World War II, the causes of the Civil Rights Movement, the causes of Vietnam. You can use this for any time you do cause and consequence. It totally fits no matter what you've selected.
And just to add to that, because that question is really important, especially when we're going online, we can teach even less of what we're used to teaching. Mm-hmm. And if, like Holly's talking about, we really centered around using our history courses to understand the past in a way to empower them to act. One thing, sort of my mantra when I'm working with teachers is, okay, so you're going to talk about that unit or you're going to talk about that content. How does that actually empower your student when they leave your class to understand and act in the world that they're going to inherit? And if they can't tell me how that piece of information is relevant to that student having power in their world, I ask, well, why are you teaching it? It may be necessary pre-knowledge to get to some other place, and that's fine. But if it's just facts of history that don't really fit into an understanding of our world, why are we teaching it? And so it really is reorganizing our history classes and seeing that as we're not just doing stories about the past, but we're giving them the knowledge and the tools and the skills, including historical knowledge, to be an empowered person in their community, in their world. So this kind of a real reframing of what it means to be teaching history that I think we're really exploring with the kind of stuff that like Holly's doing and taking to the classrooms, and other teachers are doing. Annie's doing it. We have other teachers with us in this group who are doing that as well.
And I just want to add that at the Davis Project and across the state, we're all thinking about that with limited time and limited resources. We have to think about what will empower our students to engage in the world that they need to live in. And so what are those key concepts? But primarily the skills. When you talk to historians at the university, they want students to come away with the skills and some of the deeper knowledge about themes that affect them. Rather than the factoids. So we really want to be thinking about that. And sometimes you have to customize that to what your students, who your students are and what your students need. We have a number of questions that I see some hands raised. Rachel?
Hi, yeah.
Or Rochelle, sorry.
Rachel, no, you're right the first time. Holly, you and I seem to have actually pretty similar student demographics. My school is predominantly Latinx and a lot of English learners. And something that I've run into with doing this is like the resistance, partially because, they struggle to see how it relates to them, or they just don't like history in general. So I was curious, as you said they had done the retreat before, and so I was curious about like the beginning of the year and how you kind of started them off and worked with them on getting student buy-in and initiate their understanding of history in this new way that's probably very different from what they were used to in middle school, and kind of how do you deal with those challenges of students who are resistant, or like the English learners, like probably some like mine who feel very lost or feel disconnected or like they can't do it.
Right. And I know we're supposed to go into breakout rooms too, so I'm not sure if some of these are the questions where a lot of people kind of want to engage with them as well. But in this particular case, I'm really blessed to have some fantastic aides that I work with, and we do a lot of work. I think because we do a lot of work on language in general, we're always working on language. We're always working on English in our class, whether you're a native speaker or whether this is your second language, third language. I have some students where it's their fourth. working on linguistic pieces is not strange. It's pretty normal. But again, really thinking about where I spend my curricular time. So my units tend to be pretty long, and they're spiraled and they're very skills based. So we really work on a very specific set of skills, and then very specific structures like this tree, where whenever they see this, they know exactly what they're going to do with it. So for me, it's about routine, routine. And then the first skills we work on are close reading and source evaluation. We spend like a semester in 10th grade just working on those two things. We don't even worry about getting into too much argumentative writing yet or anything like that. Just if you can read stuff, you can figure out most of the other stuff.
What was it? Close reading? What?
Close reading and source evaluation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Devin, do we want to take one more question that's got the hand raised? Nivea, I believe is her name, has been had her hand up for a minute, or do we want to move on? And yeah, Nivea, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we'll adjust as we need to for the last 10 or 15 minutes or so.
Yes, thank you. Really quick, I just want to make sure I understood the sequence because I was looking at the thing when you may have mentioned this. So in terms of like, so you use this roots and cause in your other content areas. So would this be something that you would do like in the middle of that unit if you're talking about, you know, World War II, looking at the root and the causes, or is this something that's done at the end?
Just depends. It depends on the I mean, the cool thing about it is once they know how to do it, you can really, it ceases to then become a huge lesson in how to do it, and it just becomes the way that you do it, right? It becomes like when I have a student do a reading, I spend a long time teaching them how I want them to mark up the text, and that takes a while, but once they know how to do that, then it's really easy. So I see this as just an extension of teaching kids to mark text. So whenever we're doing, anytime we're looking at causes for anything, I can even say, draw a little stick figure tree on your paper and go, you know?
So it could be like looking at a source and then filling in the tree as they're looking at the source.
They could do that, and then that'd be really fun. Like, what does an author think are the root causes? I mean, there's so many places you can go with this. It's pretty magical.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And I just want to, again, if people are interested in this, you're welcome to join the couple days workshop because we're going to be talking about this there as well. So should we move on, Stacey?
I think so. I lost my track on what we're doing next.
Well, we should rethink because we only have 12 minutes. We do a very, very short breakout for people to think about next steps.
Yeah, maybe we won't. Okay, yes. So we're only going to give you about 7 minutes. 7 minutes seem like that will work. Let's, yeah, I think if we do 7 minutes, that'll give us enough time to do our closing. So you may only get 1 or 2 ideas down on the sheet. And Devin will give you the link for the August workshop as soon as possible. Last time I'm sure he has it. It will be coming up. And if not, we'll make sure you get the link to their webpage. All that's coming up soon, first week of August. But right now we're going to go into our, return to our breakout rooms. We are going to, if Devin, you can paste the Google Sheets in there in case you can't go back to it. Just for about 7 minutes, you're going to be brainstorming what kind of support, next steps you want, what kind of goals, what kind of topics are you looking for, anything else that you would like to link to or continue on this, thinking about both for yourself and as well for the collaborative, just what kind of ideas are coming to you of where you want to go from here or where you hope the collaborative will go. Anything else you want to add before I send them to their rooms?
Good.
Okay. So you'll have about 7 minutes. No, we're going to actually do 6 now. Sorry. 6 minutes. We'll come back at 11:26. I'll send the warning at 11:25.
Stacy, I just heard the button say this meeting is being recorded. Did you not re-record it?
No, it's recording. I'm stopping it now. I'm pausing it.
Is everyone back?
Not quite yet.
Can you see?
Not quite yet. 11 seconds, 10 seconds. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming back. We're sorry. We know that was not enough time, but we want to make sure we get you out of here on time, and you will have enough time to add any other thoughts to the feedback form. So it's okay if you didn't get into the notes. We will be sharing the feedback form and other things into the chat, and then we'll also follow up with one, if not two emails. The first email will have things that we have immediately. And then once I figure out how to upload things to YouTube, or if Devin does it, we'll send you a recording of, we'll send you the link to the recording if you want to go back and see any of these pieces. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Devin for a minute. And Devin, your whole screen, you're not all, there we go. Your whole screen's showing now.
Okay. So hi, everyone. Welcome back. So there was a lot of interest in the kind of conversations that Holly was raising through that. And I just wanted to let people know kind of what we're going to be doing in this August workshop. And some of the main goals of the integrated action civics is that word integrated is key, where there's integration between the contemporary world and the historical study we do. So we look at how that happens. But also, as Holly mentioned, these tools for action civics, power analysis, stakeholder analysis, root cause, strategizing, things like that. Those are tools that are often done in civics courses or in civic action projects. But one of the things that we're trying to do is how do we take those same tools and use them as lenses in our actual content study. So we take these two ideas of stakeholder and power analysis and root causes and actually apply that to the American Revolution or to anti-colonial struggles in Africa or whatever it is that's in our historical content area. And by doing so, by the time the kids get to a project that is throughout the year, I think one of the people in the breakout rooms was mentioning this idea of this year-long development. Because you're bringing these action civics empowerment tools into your curriculum, when you actually help them go out in the world and do an action project, they already know the tools. So like when Holly says is you just say do a root cause analysis and boom, they're right there. They know what to do because they've done it 3 times in the course of their content. So that's what we're going to be talking about. You'll see in the chat there's a registration link. There's also a brochure that mentions a little bit of kind of the context of what I'm talking about. And yeah, we'd love to see you there and share them with anybody else who's interested. It's an open session. It's going to be just very, very introductory. It's not going to go into the depth that we would have to go through the whole concept in this integration thing, but it will give you a taste of what it is that we're doing and hopefully open up other opportunities to explore it further. Okay, thank you.
Devin, next slide. Oh, okay, thank you everybody. And we just want to wrap up with a big thanks to all of you for participating. And like we said, this first session was really a chance to kind of get a sense, start dialogue. We are going to use what we have in the, I got it, Devin. So we can,
okay.
We use what you generated in the notes and the conversations, and now this feedback form to try to build what we're going to do with this civic project. To be honest, we're unsure. We're hoping that we can offer it as we go forward in the year. Depending on our resources, we may be able to offer it maybe hopefully one more time before the year gets really going, but summer's starting to run out, so more than likely, if we're lucky, we'll get it to maybe once every other month or something going into the school year. So if you can fill out the survey form here, we have it. You can get it started right now. Otherwise, I'll be sending it out in the links with all the links from here and the resource pages and other things that we have developed, as well as the slide deck from this presentation. And eventually, either Devin or myself will get this loaded up to YouTube, hopefully both on UC Berkeley and UC Davis's pages, but I'm a little bit slower than Devin is on the YouTube thing. So we can also send you recording, especially for folks who had to leave early or missed it. But I think that's really all we have. If you want to reach us, you can reach either project at the emails here. And we just really thank you and hope that you found something useful and at least got to talk to other teachers about what you're doing for civics and got some ideas for everybody. Oh, to reach Holly directly. I'm sorry, I didn't have Holly. Holly, can you type your email into the chat? When we were planning this morning, I meant to ask Holly to see if she didn't mind sharing her email on here, and we forgot to do that. So Holly, if you don't mind sharing your email, you can email it here. Otherwise, if you want to email it, Berkeley and Devin can forward emails to Holly. I don't know if she's back or if her microphone's on. I don't see her. So. There she is. She's back.
Yeah, I'm back. I'll pop it in the chat really quickly.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for spending your morning with us. We hope to see you again on either this collaborative or another one. Devin, you have anything else to wrap up?
Well, just to feel free to hang around. We're going to hang around for another 10 or 15 minutes if you want to just ask questions or have conversation about some of the ideas raised. We can hang around. But as far as the formal presentation, we do really want to hear what you have to say in your feedback forms. And I'm really glad that everybody was able to join us.
Yes, and one thing on the feedback forms is if you are already doing some really exciting or even experimental or just trying something in your classrooms or your programs, or you're a partner and you're doing some work on teaching civics for empowerment, or teaching for civic empowerment, that's the tongue twister I'm having trouble with this morning, please include it on the feedback form, because we hope that this will be a place where we can all share. We know other partners and other teachers are doing awesome work that we could include in this collaborative. So you're welcome to give yourself kudos and highlight some work you're doing. So we're not the experts here exclusively. We hope that the expertise will be community generated. So thank you so much. For those of you who want to stick around, if you want to put some questions in the chat, raise your hand, or I'm going to stop talking and you can just, take your microphone off or put yourself off mute if you want to raise any questions.
Can I go ahead and ask a question?
Brett, I can recognize your voice.
Yeah. Holly, I'm curious, what was your level of engagement with kids when you entered distance learning?
It was, what do you mean my level of engagement? Like how many did we actually get?
Yeah, like what, if you had Zooms, did kids show up to the Zooms? If you had a number of assignments, what was your turn-in rate? That sort of thing, because.
Oh yeah. The kids who dropped off my Zoom were the kids who had sort of dropped off live as well. So I had some students who had been struggling with attendance and things like that prior, and they didn't show up to Zooms, but we had about I would say probably 85–90% participation. Here's what I will say. I think that what we did for our project at the very last 6 weeks, we did a department-wide historical project. And I think that actually allowed us as a department to hold department-wide office hours and makeup sessions, and because we weren't all working in isolation. So, and then all of our world history courses, I was teaching world last year, but all of our world history courses were doing the exact, we were like, I'm not gonna use the term lockstep because I think that has a bad connotation, but out of our own sort of survival, we were all doing the same thing, which made it really easy for us to, there were days where I had my kids go to my colleague's class because it was the same period, and I would go chasing after our students, you know what I mean? So it's just, I think the more collaborative you can do things, I think that's gonna be key for distance learning. I think we're all gonna go crazy if we try to do it all by ourselves. So do you have find your teaching buddy, whether it's in here or at your site or in your district, who's gonna roll with you to do some of this stuff,
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I had my hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to call on you, so I'm glad you spoke up, Melissa.
Okay, so one of the things that came up in our discussion was we're going to be working with kids that we don't know. The fall is opening up to distance learning and we haven't built those relationships with them. We haven't built relationships with families. One of the pieces that I'm working on with the district, as I mentioned before, is the scope and sequence of the course of the year for 8th grade history. But involved in that is that each department is responsible for social emotional learning, and what kinds of social emotional learning steps are we doing so that we can create these engaging communities. As much as, Holly, I would like to say that at Berkeley we're really unified and we work together well, I can't say that that's true. There are some teachers that the burden of following up with families that aren't able to engage with online learning fell very heavily on, and so much so that I think that our mental health is kind of rocky for some of us. When I added up how many hours I was spending between the hours of 6 and 9 p.m. just sitting with kids so that they could stay online and do work, I was floored. So anything around social emotional learning and engaging families and communities in the systems of school and creating safe spaces for them, resources around that.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys are thinking, and we don't know yet, but a couple of my colleagues and I've been talking about just spending the first 2 to 3 weeks just doing relationship building and talking about them as humans. And there's no to me there's no point in getting into like heavy duty content if kids don't want to be there. I don't know, Devin, if you'd want to send out, well, I don't know if it's ready to go, but just the whole idea of the empowerment framework. But this idea of like we've decided our MO this year is empowerment, and we're going to start with personal, just sort of stuff. We're going to just stay really personal until we feel confident that we're ready to move on. Because we have we struggle with kids, kind of actively engaging and not having safe spaces to work at home. So we're trying to work all that stuff out,
Mm-hmm.
Like how can we make school like community-based, learner-based places?
I think related to that, and which is going to make a very unique challenge for starting the year instead of ending the year, is, for example, doing breakout rooms with students, and you don't know who you're putting into a room together.
Mm-hmm.
We have to assure that these kids are in a verbally safe space. And I've had teachers saying, there's no way I'm putting kids into a breakout room. People will be abusive and I can't be there to monitor it. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to really be careful about like getting to know our kids, maybe even having a Google form, like who do you feel safe with, who don't you feel safe with, just kind of a privacy thing, just to get a sense of, we don't know their relationships yet. But also maybe part of our time has to be working with just us as the teacher, working with groups of 5 kids at a time. And I'm going to spend 15 minutes with this group of 5 kids because I want to get to know them, as opposed to thinking that when we're doing our in face-to-face, virtual face-to-face times, our synchronous times is always with the whole class. We may not, we're not going to be able to build a community if our synchronous time is always with everybody at once. And we don't have the time to do it one by one. So I think those are the kind of things that we're hearing people talk about exploring. But it certainly is the centerpiece of the challenge. And I say that especially if we're trying to get into engagement around contemporary issues that are fraught with controversy and emotion and different identities and different people in the space, that we want to make sure we're not putting people into harm.
Right. How many of you guys have, we're doing, I think at least for fall, we're going to have hour-long classes, and then there's an asynchronous element, but I'm thinking of, I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking of just flipping, like the content's going to be asynchronous, and the special gift of the hour that I get with students, I just want to use for engagement. Like we're talking about things, we're filling out common slide decks, so that they're engaging with the content. And I know that's, there's always a struggle. You're like, oh, the kid didn't do the reading, but there's always going to be students who don't do the reading, or watch the video or whatever. But but that's kind of what I'm thinking of doing, is really just doing a flip, so that when I see their faces, I want them to be so stoked to come to class because they're going to talk to other human beings. That's my whole mentality right now. You know,
it's interesting because the kids didn't do much talking in the class. They did talk in their breakout groups.
Yeah.
And the kinds of lessons that I had the most success with were lessons that I gamified. So there was either a Kahoot or a Quizlet live activity, or there was we did 1 or 2 Google Form treasure hunts, so that they answered these questions right, and then they could get to this answer, and then they could get to the point where they were able to write a paragraph because of the answers that they were able to get. So the gamification helped a lot. But for students who have low bandwidth, and another conversation, and I'm throwing it out there, the conversation around internet connectivity and engagement cannot be separated, and it's a national issue. It is not done by district. And if you're not pushing your union to make this a national issue, from the bottom of my heart, I'm saying please do so, because it's not being discussed, and I'm tired of being shut down. The students that tried to get free access, and I was actually a part of this group because I didn't have access at home. The free access was a joke. The bandwidth was so low that they were constantly being kicked off. I couldn't get free access as an educator. I couldn't afford it, but they wouldn't let me get it because I didn't have a letter that said I was a low-income person. I'm not a low-income person. I'm paying back student loans. So these kinds of barriers to engagement, I'm hoping to see more at the national level. And I really appreciate this conversation with you guys. I teach middle school, and I'm currently writing the scope and sequence for 8th grade history by myself. But this is the second time I've taught it in Berkeley. I'm a world language teacher, and I teach through the lens of invasion rather than colonization. So thank you guys so much.
Melissa, can I just add 2 things? One that's very interesting is what's happening in West Contra Costa County, or West Contra Costa Unified, which is right next door to you.
Yeah.
You might look on their homepage. They have a plan that's laid out that's going to allow for some student support pods on campus. So while distance learning will be happening for teachers to instruct from home, there will be instructional aides and other support services on campus where they will be inviting certain students that meet certain criteria, students with IEPs, students who need extra help, to social in a distance manner, to get that high-speed internet, to get an individual who can supervise and just help them stay on target for distance learning.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're doing it.
Yeah, Stacey, I know about that program, and I think it's an interesting take, but it still puts people at risk, and it's not addressing the greater connectivity problem across the nation and continues the silos of equity. So
absolutely, completely agree. It was just it seems like a more intermediate step when we aren't going to get an absolute solution really quickly. The other thing, I think I totally applaud the invasion part of that. And then I don't know if you've looked at, it sounds like you probably already know this, but the concept of settler colonialism as a frame for 8th grade history as a way to look at that. Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys.
Which district were you talking about a moment ago that has that system with the 8?
It's West Contra Costa Unified. It's in the East Bay, and it's centered around Richmond, the city of Richmond, but it extends into El Cerrito and others. And so basically they're setting up a support system for students who can't distance from home. It's going to be tiered, and not all students are going to have access, but they're trying to set it up so that, I mean, for example, instructional aides right now can't really do much help from home. So I think that they're trying to do it in a more safe way, so you have students spread across the campus, less students grappling together, and figuring out ways to just give them a space to work with a little bit of more assistance. And again, it's like Melissa said, it's not as safe as working from home, but they may be able to do it in more safe because they could use the cafeteria and just spread out further than trying to do school on campus. I don't know how it's going to work, but it's the first thing I've seen of a district actually trying to provide some assistance to the students who can't get it at a distance.
Or even if it's unsafe for them to work from home. Like the lack of safety at school might be safer than what they're dealing with at home. And that's a reality that we looked at. We had several kids who really struggled with that last year. Yeah, it's just going to be crazy. That's why I'm really excited about this collaborative. I'm hoping we can all kind of come together and people can share what they're doing and if they've had success and what's working. Any red flags are all, don't do this. Worst idea.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that like this space is so important because I typically do a YPAR project with my students, and I just like didn't feel comfortable doing it because YPAR in and of itself is messy, but it seems very similar to the work, Holly, that you're doing where we identify an issue that's impacting their community. They have specific findings. We link it to the work of Dr. Solorzano and Dolores Bernal to do that transformative resistance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being from like, okay, I'm aware that these issues exist, but I'm just accepting them to like shift their thinking into like, okay, what's the action piece? But I felt like it was too much to do with what was going on. So if there's strategies of like how we could continue that work online, I would love to collaborate or think through that with you.
Yeah, that sounds really fun.
Are there other questions or comments? I don't want to keep folks on unnecessarily, but I enjoy the conversation. I may have to go in a minute and switch it over to Devin to finish up hosting. And at that time, we may have to stop the recording, but anybody else?
All right, cool.
Yeah, I just want to appreciate everybody for coming in today, and we hope to see you the next session.
Yeah, and please, you know, as you fill out the feedback form, if you have specific comments or questions that you want addressed, please leave your name so we can get back to you, or feel free to email us directly, or, you know, if you want more support specifically in your district, you know, please feel free to contact either of our sites or the site nearest you, and I'm sure we can come directly to your district. Of course, at that point, we do have to charge a fee, but for these, we try to keep them at a low stakes for the summer so that we can get more people connected to each other. Okay, well, take care, have a great afternoon and a great last few weeks before you go back to school. And I just really appreciate my co-presenters and also our associate director who has on baby duty, but Catherine Cortez has been observing and in the background. And I hope you all, you know, have some time to rest, relax, and have some joy before school starts. And then, you know, best of luck connecting with your students and all of that. So wish you all well. Take care. I'm going to end the meeting now. Bye-bye.
Bye.